Hello everyone. I'm happy to say I've talking to all of you, my viewers, my subscribers, and anybody that is saw some of my Berlin videos. That I've got a new video out because it's been a while since I've filmed my last one. The reason being, we were hoping, I say we, John and I, to put new video content out, but because due to work and John has got family obligations, it's been very hard to get a schedule to go to Highgate to film Karl Marx. We are doing, or I am doing research on Karl Marx. There's a lot to know. I'd like to be able to do a tour, because there are tours of Karl Marx in London, like there is Jack the Ripper tours and any other type of tour, Beatles tours, of London and the various locations of where they were in the 60s, and how London was during the reign of Queen Victoria. So that is yet to come. I also did another. There is another video that we haven't posted yet. I have actually seen it, and it's perhaps my favourite one that I shot in Berlin. It's the Solidarity Wall that was erected. It was donated by Lech Wałęsa to the German government, and they then had it, or have it displayed, which is this wall, the Solidarity Wall, behind the Reichstag or the Bundestag. It's the government building in Berlin, and I shot a segment there when we were in Berlin, and I thought it came out really, really well. I'm doing some research on Lech Wałęsa, because I actually remember in the 80s when he was doing those strikes in Poland. And it's significant because the German government believe, or those in the government, or some of the people in the German government believe, that helped bring down the Berlin Wall. So it's a very important part of Berlin, German and European history that I am fascinated by. So that's to come. So I've decided to do this video, and this is relative to history, what history is and what it represents. I believe history is something that we can all learn from, because we will become wiser for it. If you've experienced some kind of event during your life, well, that's your history, so it's very personal. And then if it was bad, you can learn from it. As bad as it might be, there might be something, some wisdom in the experience that you experienced. So, and that aids your own backstory to your life, and you make adjustments accordingly as you the wiser that you become. There are people that have, or soldiers that have battle scars, and they're proud of their battle scars because there's a lot of knowledge in it. And so if you suffered some kind of trauma, some kind of event during the course of your life, you can learn from that. You can get knowledge from that. You can get insight from it. And I believe this is the same with history. So history has a lot to teach us. And yet a lot of us don't always pay attention to history. And I think that goes for governments too. So this video presentation is all about history, and the title to this video is going to be History, the Truth, the Whole Truth, and Nothing But the Truth. So I have a stack of books here that I've brought that I hope will demonstrate in some way what history is all about, and the truth of history and the lies of history, because they both coalesce with each other. We get a lot of truth from history, but we also get a lot of myth from history. So, or we get what we call propaganda, or a narrative. And this can actually confuse some people and delight others. This book here is by Jonathan Plummer, and it's called Tragedy in Hope. And you'd be looking at the cover thinking, what's this got to do with Berlin? Well, it has a lot, actually. The subtitle of it is The Illusion of Justice, Freedom and Democracy. Now, this is a 200-page book. I read this book through three times in a row. I didn't stop. So once I got to the end of the book, I read it again. And then when I read it all the way through, I read it again. So I read through this book 3 times. And he has so much to teach, because what it is basically saying is that we are run by, I assume, or I presume, a powerful elite. Families, royalty, corporations perhaps, bankers, families like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and people that are invited because they, in some way or another, have something to offer these elites, these 1%ers, these puppet masters, these people that hide behind the curtain or work within the shadows, and whose names we might never know, and the maneuvers and the gambits that they use to get whatever it is that they want and desire. So this is like a precursor or preface to this particular book. This one takes the title. This book took the title of this book. So Joseph Plummer condensed 1,300 pages down to 200 pages. So he's giving you an overview of what this book is all about. This book was written by a chap called Carroll Quigley. He wrote 2 books. This one, Tragedy in Hope. This was published in 1966. And another one called Anglo-American Establishment. Now that book, Anglo-American Establishment, was not published until after his death, because Quigley was so fearful of the elite and what they might do to him that he was fearful of publishing it while he was alive. So they actually published it after his death. And that book was written in 1949. This book came out in 1966, and his wife typed it. So you can imagine how much text she had to type out before this book was published. Now this talks about the 20th century, or even the turn of the century, and it covers everything that we would otherwise not know, simply because these powerful elites have access to those in government, those in military, people in corporations, people that are in the finance, banking. They have access to very influential people within governments that can manipulate, that can maneuver in such a way that they can get whatever it is that they want. And Carroll Quigley was one of the first to be able to accomplish this with this book. When this book was published, the publishers wanted to discontinue the book. That is to say, they wanted to delete it and not come up with a second or a third edition. And he kept wondering why, because there were always people making inquiries about, what's happened to the books, and they said, oh, we've lost the plates, we can't print anymore, nobody's interested, nobody wants to buy any books, and that kind of thing. And then he figured it out himself. He suddenly saw that the powerful elites were threatening the publishers of this particular book. So that's why they were fearful of actually reprinting this book or making a second or third edition of this book. So, but now this is a brand new copy. This is not a second-hand book. This is bought brand new. I ordered this from the United States. Cost me 28 quid, and I can't wait to dig into it. I mean, it's going to take me a while to get through it, but with the help of this book, it's given me an insight of what this particular book is. Now, I mention this book because of these two books. Do you remember I said, for those of my viewers who have been keeping up with me, that I like to focus on Berlin from 1914 to 1994, and within good reason. Here's a book by Gerry Docherty and Jim McGregor that talks about how the First World War started, and it actually started a long time before the First World War began. This book, Prolonging the Agony, talks about the First World War itself and and the shenanigans that were going on behind the scenes to prolong it. I love books with covers that express what the book is about. So you have the title, Hidden History, The Secret Origins of the First World War, Gerry Docherty, Jim McGregor. And then you see redacted. That represents a lot. These authors read this book. It was this book that inspired these two books. And consequently, having the information, they had to source archives, libraries, diaries, contracts, old newspaper articles, speeches that were made at the time, and anybody that was alive or is related to somebody that was in the government at the time when the First World War occurred. One of these powerful people that was the instigator to the First World War was this man, Cecil Rhodes. Some of you might know him, some might not. Cecil Rhodes was an imperialist who went to South Africa and made his fortune. And one of the reasons why he went out there was because of his health. He knew he was a man on a mission, because he knew he didn't have that much time to live. He was fearful that at some point he knew that he would die young. So he was determined to make every effort to colonize Africa. So he went to South Africa and he made his fortune in the diamond mines. So they would get these workers, or coolies is perhaps the term that perhaps is not often a word that's often used, but it is derogatory to those people that work for a meagre living, that labour under awful conditions in the diamond mines of South Africa. He also instigated the Boer War, the First Boer War and the Second Boer War, and the reason for that is they wanted to acquire the gold mines in Transvaal, and that was country that was, they took it over from the indigenous people, and these were the Boers. A Boer is another word for a farmer, and it was through the fighting, or the style of fighting that they had, because they knew the country, they were used to the climate, they fought a guerrilla warfare. And why I mention the Boer Wars, because that's the precursor to the First World War. Everything relates, as I say, everything that I'm saying relates to everything, to the subject of Berlin history, German history, European history, world history. So it all relates. And this man instigated this secret cabal, these group of powerful men who wanted to colonize effectively the countries around the world, take their natural resources and use the indigenous people of those countries as cheap labour. I mean, a little more than a slavery. And so the racism was a very, very powerful thing at the time, and they tended to look down on these people in the colonies, because it's something that they perceived that they had every right to do. Like, God gave them the right, and these people are savages, and we shall teach them a lesson like you teach children lessons. And Cecil Rhodes was somebody who had carried a torch for this. So what came after that pretty much was the First World War. War in Victorian times, when Queen Victoria was on the throne, was something that they were used to. There was always a war around the world, nearly every year that Queen Victoria was on the throne. So war is a means by which they can influence or take whatever it is that they believe they have every right to, which is natural resources. Like Kenya, for example, it's fertile land, so a lot of settlers went to Kenya in order to cultivate the land, and they were called settlers. And when I was in the army, I actually saw some of these settlers. That they were these white privileged people who had these great big farms and made a lot of money because they had the cheap labour from the indigenous people, who had cheap labour to cultivate the land for them. And they were there, and I remember seeing them. But getting back to my point, when the First World War, when it started in 1914, there was a lot of planning prior to the actual war, the actual First World War. There was a lot that they did in order to bring about a war against Germany. The British Empire at the time felt in some way, and now this is how I got it out of reading these books. There's a sense that they were losing grip of the empire, even at that time. Now, I always perceived it was after the First World War. You could actually see the cracks appearing on that the empire was in some way disintegrating. So just at the turn of the century, just at the point just before Queen Victoria passed away, they felt that they had to do something. And the country that they wanted to go to war with was Germany, because Germany at that time and that point were industrializing. Their economy was growing, their shipbuilding was becoming more prominent, and the British felt more threatened by this, because sometimes facts don't always play a part. It's just the perception that this shipbuilding and the amount of shipbuilding that they do would become a navy, and that navy would then conquer the high seas, because the British always felt that their navy, they can control all the shipping lanes. So when you do trade, you had to be careful with who you were doing trade with, otherwise Britain could see it as a threat, and then they would want to invade, or they want to attack you, or they want to overthrow or assassinate you, or have a coup. you know, to bring about the destruction of a particular government. And if they weren't able to, then, you know, they would then invade. So they saw this as a threat. So their plan was to take on Germany, and they had to find a way of doing it. Now, I'm nowhere near an expert in the First World War. There was just so much to learn and take in and absorb, because the subject of Berlin is so vast. It's, you know, there's only so much that I can take in and absorb and be able to explain about the ins and outs about the First World War. But that was one of the first industrial wars where the elites were able to build artillery shells, artillery pieces, rifles, even towards the end, tanks, planes, and they can charge exorbitant prices for their pieces because they know that these countries like Britain and France need them. And so you have these industrialists making an absolute fortune out of making weapons, so that the British and the French and eventually the Americans can fight the Germans. Here is something that I never knew. During the course of the war, there were two events which are very suspicious, and they lead a lot to more for investigation as to how this was done and what the outcome was. There was a relief for Belgium. During the course of the war, there was a relief for Belgium, for the children of Belgium, the people of Belgium. And food parcels were being sent from Britain to Belgium in order to help the Belgian people. However, a lot of these parcels weren't going to the Belgian people, they were going to the Germans. And the British government knew about this. They knew that these parcels weren't going to the people that needed them. They were going to the German people. They was feeding the German army. And nobody could understand why, or they'd have arguments about it, you know, in the House of Commons, but the food parcels continued. The elites wanted to feed the German army in order to prolong the war. That was the point of it. It's the same with the oil. The oil, an army requires oil. If it doesn't have oil, it can't fight. The war would come to an end. It would last maybe a month or 6 weeks before the war would be over, because you can't function without oil. There was oil coming from Romania, and the Allies knew that the Germans were benefiting from this oil, and consequently there was a lot of arguing and discussion and wondering why these the oil was getting to the Germans and what they could do to stop it. But it was never stopped. This was to prolong the war. This was deliberately done to prolong the war. So you can imagine the millions of people, soldiers, civilians, that died or were severely wounded as a result of the war, prolonging the war, deliberately prolonging the war, because these authors, Jim McGregor and Jerry Doherty, realised that the war could have ended in 1915. So that thing about, oh, it will be all over by Christmas, it's like closer to the truth, effectively. You know, it could have been over by Christmas. And yet it went on from 1914 to 1918. These authors also discovered that the war didn't end in 1918. The war did not end in 1918. It ended in 1919 because there was a naval blockade around Germany. So no food was getting to the German people. And consequently, they were starving. They were literally starving. Because there was no food to distribute for the people, so they had nothing to eat. Another insight that I got from food was how this was used as a bargaining chip. At the end of the war, all the documents for the First World War were taken by those that were providing the food, which was the Americans. The Americans insisted on having all the documents, taking all the documents reference to the First World War, from the French, from the Belgians, from the Germans, from the Dutch, from the Russians. All gave their documents, and they're all residing in an archive in California to this day. This war was ended over 100 years ago, and yet we still don't have access to these documents. And these authors believe that they wanted to hush or keep the documents away from prying eyes, especially historians, so they cannot find out how the First World War actually began. This is not unusual. I mean, I was skeptical when I first heard of this, when these documents were all of a sudden, when they were saying that they were taking these documents and they were shipping these documents all to the night. I couldn't put two and two together when it was so clear, to anyone but me, that they were covering up what brought about the First World War. And this is not unusual. This happened with the end of the British Empire as well. So when Britain left India, they did exactly the same, only this time, instead of transporting all the documents back to Britain, they burnt them. The documents were being burnt going up in smoke. Same in Kenya, when Kenya sought independence. All the documents that they had, that the governor had, who was governing Kenya, controlling Kenya, were burnt. What does that tell you? So literally, history was going up in smoke. If you don't have the documents, how are you going to know what the truth is? And what happens? They create an official truth. An official truth is whatever they decide is the general public have every right to read, study, and discover. If you control the information, you can control people. It's as simple as that. And that's when I realised that a lot of history is untrue. It's myth. It's created. It's a narrative. It's propaganda. It's all those things. It's difficult to know what the truth is. And these authors, Carroll Quigley and Jerry Doherty and Jim McGregor, opened my eyes as to what history is, or what true history is. But you really have to dig to find it, and even then you might not find everything. You can only find as much as what's available, and you can go on only what's available. And if it's not out there, if you don't have access to it, how will you ever know it? So governments will create a narrative or create history that they deem official, that then get taught in schools and colleges and universities. And if you don't stick with the narrative, if you don't do what is being taught, then you won't get your qualification. You won't get your your GCSE or your O level, your A level, or your diploma, because you're not sticking to what they tell you. If you go off and write, a dissertation that goes against the narrative, then you're not going to get the qualification that you seek. You know, and if you go to university, you're there to get the qualification so that you get a decent job. And if you don't have the qualification, well, you know, it's that's the end of your study, and you know, you better go and find a job without the qualification. So, and that's how they can control people. So it makes sense to become an amateur historian, because then you're independent, and consequently, if you're independent, there is nobody holding a gun to your head, and you can go in any direction you choose to. And if you want to do your own research, go ahead and do it. But that's the thing about research. Research takes a long time, and it's hard to find the information. But there is information that's out there, but it's scattered throughout the world. So unless you have a Patreon, you know, so you have someone sponsoring you, that so you can go and do this research and go all, you know, to these former colonies to try and find these documents that are available, or to interview people that had lived through those times, then clearly you will have what I call insider information. So that's the information that you have that nobody else has, because you're the one that found it. So here's my point. I've got here Der Versailles à Berlin. This is a French book. This is a book about the Treaty of Versailles. I can't speak any French, but I know I'm going to get this book translated, because there's so little that I know that concerns the French. Because in Berlin, Berlin was broken up into 4 zones. You had the Russian zone, you had the American zone, you had the British zone, and the last was the French. Now, I believe that there is history that the French will allow the general public to have access to, that perhaps you won't find in an English publication or an American publication. So it is worth picking up these things. And I'm thinking, well, why is it going from 1919 to 1945? That's a mystery to me. Hence why I bought this book. Versailles was a very, very damaging treaty to the Germans. They were literally forced to sign the treaty that was damaging to the country and its people, and that had massive, massive consequences, because that brought the Nazis into power, because it was as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. There are historians that deny this, but I have no doubt, I have none at all, of what happened to Germany after the end of the First World War, because like I said, in 1919 there was a blockade around Germany, so no food was getting in, and the Germans were starving. This happened again in the Second World War, the end of Second World War. There's also the history about what happened to the Berliners, to the Germans themselves after the Second World War. Happened exactly the same as the first. There were thousands of people that starved to death. There were thousands of prisoners of war, German prisoners of war, that starved to death or died of illnesses and diseases of one kind or another, because this was a deliberate policy, and we don't get to hear it, but there is information out there. It's just a question of finding it. Here's a book that I've got here, The Lies My Teacher Told Me. Now this book, I've read some of it, I haven't read all of it. This is like what you call an official account of history. It's what the government allow teachers and professors to teach. So when you go to a to college or university, this is the official policy that they have, that the government has over the educational system, and how students are to be taught, and what it is that they have to learn before, in order for them to get their qualifications. So this book has a lot to. I mean, this is an eye opener, because I never knew about this kind of thing. I mean, look at that, lies. It's a really powerful insight when you start to look into these things. This is a book about an English guy who was in Berlin. He went to East Berlin, and he was being followed and observed by the Stasi. Now, I like this book because it actually shows that you have access to your own files. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, all those that were in East Germany, or some had some relation to East Germany, like they could be foreigners that were working, or that were journalists that were allowed to go into East Berlin, or they were allowed to go to Leipzig or any other, or Dresden, any of the other big cities, and work there. They were being surveyed by the Stasi, and they would write the detail of what they did, what they were wearing, where they were seen, what time, the people that they were meeting, the cafes that they attended to, the bars that they attended to, did they have a girlfriend, when did they go round there? Everything was written down to such detail that it's mind-boggling. However, even when these people said they wanted to see their files, they would go to see their files, they had access to their files, they were still redacting their files. There was information, and you see it. You can actually see them on film, where they are redacting their files. If you think about it, you want to read every word. You don't want it redacted. You want to read every word, however small, however inconsequential. You want to read every word that's on that in the files. No, still don't have complete access to the files. I read this book, very insightful, and it's well worth rereading this book. Let's see. Now, here we are. This is a book I think I showed before, Documents on Berlin, 1943 to 1963. These are documents released in book form. So they get the documents, and then they make a book out of the documents. Now, these guys, whoever they are, I mean, I've got these glasses, I can't read even the writing on here, my eyesight's so bad. They will have done their editing. They say, well, no, we don't need to put that in the book. No, we don't need to put that book. That file doesn't need to go in the book. Nobody would be interested in that. And there would be those that actually are in control of those documents. They're saying, well, you can't read this, you can't have access to this, and you can't have access to that, and don't put that bit in, we're going to redact that. So again, all the information gets filtered, and we don't have access to it, every file, when we need to, because there could be a clue, there could be something within those files and in those documents, by having access to them, would lead to more information or a deeper insight into how the country is being governed. So this book is a very, very powerful and insightful book in my eyes, simply because it says documents on Berlin, and there are many other books like this out there, but they're not cheap. They're very expensive. But this is where you find the history. This is the stuff. You've got to get books like this that have the documents that will give you a deeper understanding of how Germany is being governed. Right. Here's a couple of books that, again, you might be thinking, why is he bringing these books? It makes no sense. My dear friend Keith Badman wrote this book. It's a book on Marilyn Monroe. I show this book because I know the level of research that he did in order for him to write this book. I mean, he took 5 years of research on the last 2 years of Marilyn Monroe's life and death. And this is endorsed by the Marilyn Monroe estate. That's how highly valued this book is, because he really does do his research. Like, he went to the United States, he went to Boston, he went to Hyannisport, where the Kennedy, the family compound of the Kennedys is based, and he was allowed on to their estate, and he went to the Kennedy Library in Boston. So he knew this thing about Kennedy and Marilyn, and and they were shagging at the Holiday Inn, and he was swinging off the chandeliers. Never happened. Never happened. It happened. That was one night. It did one night, and that was it. Because he's running the country, and she's in California, and of course, travel in those days is a lot different to what it is today. So how can he be going to California, or how she could be going to Washington DC? It's impossible. So it just didn't happen. Now, why I mention it is because this is what I would call forgotten history. What I mean by forgotten history is history that you have to look for it. It's out there. It's available for the general public, but you have to look for it. You might not get it in one particular library or in another particular archive. You might have to go, instead of, say, going to London, you might have to go to Edinburgh, or you might have to go to Belgium, or you might have to go to France, or you might have to go, you might have to go around the world searching for and to dig inside the archive in order to find the information that you seek. So that's what I mean by forgotten histories. History that hasn't been written about, perhaps in book form, or it's not covered in any great detail, where you have researchers as good as Keith Badman that will dig up this information in order to write this book. It's the same with this one. Chaos. The truth behind the Manson murders. Tom O'Neill spent 20 years, count them, 20 years researching this book. This is an astounding book. This is what a researcher... You want to know about history? You want to know what the truth is? Because the truth is precious, it's priceless. You can't put a price on it. And it's whiter than snow. If you can't find the truth, what are you believing? It's like believing in a myth. You think a myth is true when it's not. Can you imagine how devastating that must be if you were to find out about something that you always believed is to be true and it's not true? And this book actually proves the information is out there, but it literally blows your mind because of what you thought was true and it's not. It can shatter you. There's a story, and it is in the Quigley book, that Tragedy in Hope book, where a lawyer did her own sleuthing and investigating, and she found out that the government wanted to deliberately dumb down the educational system. She was so shocked about it, she was so overwhelmed by it, that she could no longer work. Something just broke in her mind, because it just shattered the illusion. is what she thought was true was not true. That's how damning it is. That's how overwhelming it is. That a person that would do their own research, it got so, she was so overwhelmed by it, she could no longer work. It's tragic. Now, my last book is the Pentagon Papers. This is when a whistleblower blew the whistle on the Vietnam War. Daniel Ellsberg, I think his name is. I was fortunate enough to get these. There's four volumes of this that I bought in a charity shop in Windsor. And I'm so pleased to have these. And I got these really, really cheap. I was surprised that, that I got them as cheap as I did, because I thought it was worth a lot more. This is a whistleblower. This is where the truth gets out. If you get a whistleblower, like Julian Assange, for example, whatever you think of him, he's not so much a whistleblower in the traditional sense. He's just like a publisher of the documents and information that came from a whistleblower. But that's where the truth is. And governments don't like it. If you get sensitive information, they could throw the book at you. And in fact, they could assassinate you. That's no joke. If they want you gone because of the damning information that you have, and they're fearful of what you might do with it, they could kill you. That's the level of the insight that I'm getting from this type of information. Now, this is insider information. These documents in this book, the Pentagon Papers, has long been since deleted, and I'm amazed that it's no longer available. You can't go to Amazon. Well, you might, to look for it, but you might pay a pretty penny for them. I found this in a charity shop, and believe me, I mean, I wish I could say that I read it. I haven't got round to reading it yet, but I have a library, and anybody who has their own library can't ever say that they've read every book in their library. And in my case, that's the truth, because I haven't. But I just wanted to make a point of whistleblowers and people that, even governments, they deliberately leak things to the press. And that's how you have access to some of this insider information that is often kept away from the public. It's the same with the John F. Kennedy assassination. They still haven't released all the documents of the John F. Kennedy assassination. Here we are, 61 years after his assassination. We still don't have access to all the documents. The Perfuma affair, exactly the same. We don't have documents that all the information that is under lock and key. We still don't have it. I could go to the Freedom of Information request and ask for the documents related to the Perfuma affair, and I'll be denied it. And it's 61 years since they went to the High Court at the Old Bailey. We still don't have the transcripts to the Perfuma affair. So anyway, I hope this didn't go on too long. I hope that you did get some insight into the history and the difference between official history, forgotten history, and hidden history, and to be able to differentiate between all three of them. So the more you know, clearly, the bigger and the deeper the understanding that you would have in whatever subject that you choose to investigate. So, auf Wiedersehen.